My name is Jack Holloway, and I've been a private investigator in this gloomy city for the better part of 2 decades. I've seen my fair share of strange cases, but nothing could have prepared me for what I was about to encounter. It was a dreary Tuesday evening when my phone rang, piercing through the silence of my dimly lit office. I hesitated for a moment, considering letting it go to voicemail, but something in my gut told me to answer. That decision would change my life forever. Holloway Investigations, I answered, my voice gruff from too many cigarettes and not enough sleep. Please, you have to help me. The man's voice on the other end was frantic, bordering on hysterical. My wife, she's gone. The forest. It took her. I sat up straighter in my chair, my interest piqued. Slow down, sir. What's your name, and what do you mean the forest took her? I'm David. David Mercer, he replied, his voice shaking. We were camping near Blackwood Forest. She went for a walk and never came back. It's been 2 days, and the police, they don't believe me. They think she just left, but I know something's wrong. The forest, it's not natural. Please, you have to believe me. I'd heard whispers about Blackwood Forest before, tales of strange occurrences and unexplained disappearances. I'd always dismissed them as local legends, but the raw fear in David's voice made me reconsider. I'll take the case, Mr. Mercer, I said, surprising myself with the decision. I'll meet you at the forest's edge tomorrow morning. First light. As I hung up the phone, a chill ran down my spine. Little did I know, I was about to step into a nightmare that would challenge everything I thought I knew about the world. As dawn broke, I found myself standing at the edge of Blackwood Forest. The dense fog that clung to the trees seemed to swallow the morning light, creating an eerie twilight atmosphere. I pulled my coat tighter around me, fighting off a shiver that had nothing to do with the cold. Mr. Holloway. A voice called out, startling me from my thoughts. I turned to see a man approaching, his face haggard and eyes wild with fear and exhaustion. David Mercer looked like he had aged a decade in just a few days. David Mercer? I asked, extending my hand. His grip was weak and clammy as we shook hands. Thank you for coming, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I don't know what else to do. Sarah's still out there, I can feel it. As David spoke, my eyes were drawn back to the forest. The trees seemed to loom over us, their branches reaching out like gnarled fingers. The fog swirled and danced, creating shapes that disappeared as quickly as they formed. For a moment, I could have sworn I heard whispers carried on the wind. Tell me everything, I said, turning back to David. Don't leave out any details, no matter how small or strange they might seem. As David began his story, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The forest seemed to press in around us, listening, waiting. I steeled myself, knowing that to find Sarah, we would have to venture into its depths. With David's story fresh in my mind, we ventured into the forest. The fog thickened with each step, muffling our footsteps and creating an unsettling cocoon of silence around us. I kept my eyes peeled for any sign of Sarah or her belongings. There, David pointed, his voice trembling. That's where I last saw her footprints. I crouched down, examining the forest floor. Sure enough, there were faint impressions of boots in the soft earth. But as I followed the trail, something bizarre happened. The footprints simply vanished, as if Sarah had been plucked from the ground. This doesn't make sense, I muttered, more to myself than to David. As I stood up, a gust of wind rustled through the trees. With it came a sound that made my blood run cold. Whispers, barely audible but unmistakably present. I couldn't make out words, just a cacophony of hushed voices that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. David grabbed my arm, his eyes wide with terror. Do you hear that? It's been like this since she disappeared. Something's out there, Mr. Holloway. Something took my Sarah. I wanted to dismiss his claims, to find a rational explanation, but the evidence before me defied logic. The vanishing footprints, the otherworldly whispers. It all pointed to something beyond my usual experience. "We need to go deeper," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Whatever happened to Sarah, the answers are in this forest." We pressed on, deeper into the heart of Blackwood Forest. The fog grew thicker, swirling around us like a living entity. The whispers intensified, becoming more distinct with each step. I strained to understand them, but the words remained just out of reach, like a half-remembered dream. As we walked, I noticed more anomalies. Strange symbols carved into tree trunks, barely visible beneath a layer of moss. Rocks arranged in patterns that seemed too deliberate to be natural. The forest was alive with secrets, and every instinct told me we were getting closer to the truth. "Look!" David suddenly exclaimed, pointing to a tattered piece of fabric caught on a thorny bush. I carefully extracted it, recognizing it as part of a woman's shirt. "It's Sarah's," David confirmed, his voice a mix of hope and dread. As I examined the cloth, a chill ran down my spine. The fabric was stained with what looked like dried blood, and there were strange markings etched into it. Symbols I didn't recognize, but that filled me with an inexplicable sense of foreboding. We continued on, following this new lead. The whispers grew louder, almost mocking in their intensity. I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder, feeling watched by unseen eyes. Suddenly, the trees thinned out, revealing a small clearing. In the center stood an old, dilapidated cabin. Its weathered wood seemed to absorb the surrounding fog, giving it a ghostly appearance. "I've never seen this before," David whispered, his face pale with shock. I approached the cabin cautiously, my hand instinctively reaching for the gun holstered at my side. As we drew closer, the whispers abruptly ceased, leaving us in an eerie silence that was somehow even more unsettling. "Stay close," I warned David as I reached for the cabin's door. "We're about to find out what's really going on in this forest." The door creaked open, revealing an interior that sent chills down my spine. The single room was dimly lit by candles, their flickering flames casting grotesque shadows on the walls. The air was thick with the acrid smell of incense and something metallic, blood, I realized with growing horror. Every surface was covered in arcane symbols and ritualistic objects. Bones of small animals hung from the ceiling, tied with red thread. On the far wall, a large pentagram was painted in what looked disturbingly like dried blood. "My God!" David gasped beside me, his voice barely a whisper. I moved further into the cabin, my eyes drawn to a crude altar at the center of the room. Atop it lay a leather-bound book, its pages yellow with age. As I approached, the whispers I'd heard in the forest seemed to emanate from the book itself, growing louder with each step. With trembling hands, I opened the tome. The pages were filled with handwritten text in a language I didn't recognize, interspersed with disturbing illustrations of human sacrifices and forest entities. "This is some kind of spell book," I muttered, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. As I flipped through the pages, a folded piece of paper fell out. I unfolded it, revealing a list of names. My blood ran cold as I saw Sarah's name at the bottom, circled in red. "David," I called, my voice tight with dread. "I think I know what happened to your wife." But as I turned to face him, I saw something in David's eyes that made me freeze. The fear and desperation were gone, replaced by a cold, calculating look that I'd seen before in the eyes of killers. "I'm afraid you know too much, Mr. Holloway," David said, his voice unnaturally calm. "I can't let you leave this forest." My mind raced as I stared at David, the pieces of this twisted puzzle falling into place. "You're part of this," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "There was never any missing wife, was there?" David's lips curled into a cruel smile. "Sarah wasn't my wife. She was a sacrifice, Just like you're about to be. I backed away, my hand reaching for my gun. Why? What could possibly drive you to do this? Power, David hissed, his eyes gleaming with a fanatical light. The forest offers untold power to those willing to pay the price. We've been feeding it for years, and now it's ready to reward us. As he spoke, the whispers in the cabin grew to a deafening roar. The candles flickered violently, and I could feel an oppressive force pressing down on me. "You're insane," I growled, fighting against the fear threatening to overwhelm me. "You can't possibly believe " My words were cut short as David lunged at me, a wicked-looking dagger in his hand. I barely managed to dodge, the blade slicing through my jacket. In that moment, I was faced with a horrifying realization. This was no longer just about solving a case or saving a victim. I was fighting for my own survival against forces I couldn't fully comprehend. As David prepared for another attack, I knew I had to act fast. The forest was awakening, and I was trapped in the middle of a nightmare I never could have imagined. Avid lunged at me again, his dagger glinting in the candlelight. I managed to grab his wrist, but his strength was unnatural, fueled by dark forces I couldn't comprehend. We grappled, knocking over candles and ritualistic objects. Suddenly, the cabin itself seemed to come alive. The whispers turned into screams, and the walls began to ooze a black, viscous substance. Shadowy tendrils emerged from the corners, reaching for us with malevolent intent. "You see," David laughed maniacally, "the forest welcomes your fear." I finally managed to break free from his grip and drew my gun. "This ends now," I growled, aiming at him. But before I could pull the trigger, one of the shadow tendrils wrapped around my ankle, yanking me off balance. I fired wildly, the bullet splintering wood instead of hitting its intended target. David took advantage of my stumble, charging at me with his dagger raised. In a desperate move, I rolled to the side, causing him to crash into the altar. The spell book fell to the floor, and to my amazement, burst into flames. An inhuman howl filled the air, and the cabin shook violently. The fire from the book spread rapidly, engulfing the dry wood of the walls and floor. "No!" David screamed, trying to salvage the burning book. "You've ruined everything." As the flames grew higher, I realized I had only moments to escape. The forest's manifestations were becoming more aggressive, the heat more intense. I had to get out, and fast. The cabin was quickly becoming an inferno, the heat searing and smoke thick. I stumbled towards the door, coughing and disoriented. David's agonized screams pierced through the roar of the flames as he futilely tried to save the burning spellbook. As I reached for the door handle, a powerful force slammed it shut. The forest wasn't going to let me leave so easily. Panic rising, I shoulder-charged the door repeatedly, feeling it slowly give way under my desperate assault. Finally, the door splintered, and I tumbled out into the foggy forest. But my relief was short-lived. The trees around me writhed and twisted unnaturally, their branches reaching out like claws. The ground beneath my feet became soft and unstable, threatening to swallow me whole. I ran blindly through the forest, branches whipping at my face and unseen roots trying to trip me. The whispers had returned, now a cacophony of angry voices demanding my soul. My lungs burned from the smoke and exertion, but pure adrenaline kept me going. Behind me, I could hear the cabin collapsing, the fire spreading to the surrounding trees. The forest's fury intensified, as if blaming me for the destruction of its unholy shrine. Just when I thought I couldn't run any further, I saw a glimmer of light ahead. With one final burst of energy, I sprinted towards it, breaking through the tree-line and collapsing onto the road beyond. As I lay there gasping for air, I dared to look back. The edge of Blackwood Forest loomed ominously, but its malevolent force seemed unable to reach me here. In the days that followed, I struggled to come to terms with what had happened in Blackwood Forest. The authorities found no trace of David or the cabin, just a large, inexplicable area of burnt forest. They dismissed my story as the ravings of a man suffering from smoke inhalation and exhaustion. But I knew the truth. I had glimpsed a world beyond our understanding, a realm of dark forces and ancient evils. The scars on my body and the nightmares that plagued my sleep were constant reminders of my brush with the supernatural. As for Sarah and the other names on that list, they remained missing. I couldn't help but wonder how many other victims the forest had claimed over the years, and how many more it would take in the future. One thing was certain. My days of being just another private investigator were over. I had seen the darkness, and it had seen me. It's been months since that harrowing night in Blackwood Forest, and I've made the decision to step away from detective work altogether. The weight of what I experienced, the knowledge of what lurks in the shadows, has changed me irrevocably. I find myself jumping at shadows, seeing hidden meanings in the most mundane of symbols. The whispers of the forest still echo in my dreams, a constant reminder of the thin veil between our world and the unknown. I've spent countless hours researching similar occurrences, delving into forgotten lore and esoteric texts. The more I learn, the more I realize how little we truly understand about the nature of evil and the vast, uncaring universe we inhabit. Some nights, I stand at my window, staring out at the city lights, and I can't help but wonder, how many other dark forces are out there, hidden just beneath the surface of our perceived reality? And how long before they, like the forest, hunger for more sacrifices? I don't have the answers, and perhaps that's what terrifies me most. All I know is that I've glimpsed the abyss, and it's forever changed the way I see the world. I've been on the force for over 2 decades now, patrolling the quiet streets of Maplewood, a small town where everyone knows everyone. At least, that's what I thought. My name's Jack Holloway, and after years of dealing with petty crimes and occasional domestic disputes, I never imagined I'd find myself in the middle of a case that would shake our community to its core. It was a cold, foggy night in late October. The kind of night where the mist clings to your skin and seeps into your bones. I was just about to finish my shift, looking forward to a warm cup of coffee and my worn-out armchair at home. That's when the call came in. The dispatcher's voice crackled through the radio, urgency clear in her tone. Unit 17, we have a 10-31 at 1423 Elm Street. Female caller, sounds terrified. My heart rate picked up as I responded, 10-4, en route. A 10-31, crime in progress. In Maplewood, this usually meant a break-in or a heated argument gone too far. But something in the dispatcher's voice told me this was different. As I sped through the deserted streets, the fog swirling in my headlights, the woman's frantic words played through the radio. "Please, help me. He's going to kill me. I'm at the Old Victorian on Elm Street. Hurry." The line went dead after that. I pressed harder on the accelerator, my mind racing. The Old Victorian. Everyone knew that house. It had stood empty for years, a looming shadow at the edge of town. I turned onto Elm Street, the houses growing sparser, older. And there it was, emerging from the fog like a ghost ship on a misty sea, the Victorian mansion. As I pulled up, I couldn't shake the feeling that this night was about to change everything. The Old Victorian loomed before me, a hulking silhouette against the night sky. Its weathered facade and intricate gingerbread trim seemed to mock the cheerful homes I'd passed on my way here. Neglect had turned what was once probably a grand dame of architecture into a decrepit relic. I stepped out of my patrol car, the crunch of gravel under my boots unnaturally loud in the stillness. The fog had thickened, wrapping around the house like a shroud. My flashlight cut through the mist, revealing overgrown shrubbery and a weed-choked path leading to the front porch. As I approached, my trained eye caught details that set off alarm bells in my head. The front door stood ajar, a sliver of darkness beyond. Windows, most with cracked or missing panes, stared down at me like empty eye sockets. The porch steps creaked ominously under my weight. Police. Is anyone here? I called out, my voice seeming to be swallowed by the fog. No response came. With one hand on my holstered weapon, I pushed the door open wider. It groaned on rusted hinges, the sound echoing through what I assumed was an empty foyer. The beam of my flashlight revealed peeling wallpaper, a thick layer of dust on every surface, and what looked like recent footprints disturbing that dust. The air inside was stale, with an underlying scent I couldn't quite place. Musty, yes, but with something else. Something that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. Someone was here, or had been very recently. And given the desperate call, they might still be in danger. I had to search the house, every room, every hidden corner. Little did I know, I was stepping into a nightmare that would haunt me for years to come. I moved cautiously through the house, my footsteps echoing in the emptiness. Each room told the same story of abandonment and decay. The living room with its sheet-covered furniture, the kitchen with rusted appliances, all eerily undisturbed despite the frantic call. As I ascended the creaking staircase, my radio suddenly crackled to life, making me jump. The dispatcher's voice came through, tense and low. Unit 17, we've received another call from the same woman. She says she's upstairs, locked in a room. Be advised, proceed with caution. My heart raced. She was still here, still alive. Copy that, I whispered back, not wanting to alert anyone else who might be in the house. The upper floor was a maze of shadowy corridors and closed doors. I checked each room methodically, my sense of urgency growing with each empty space I encountered. The beam of my flashlight danced across peeling wallpaper and dusty floorboards, revealing nothing but abandonment. Then I heard it, a faint sound coming from the end of the hallway. A muffled whimper, barely audible. I approached the last door, my hand resting on my gun. Ma'am, this is the police. Are you in there? Silence. Then a soft thud, like someone moving against the door. I tried the handle. Locked. Stand back, I called out. I'm going to break the door down. Taking a step back, I braced myself. With a silent prayer that I wasn't walking into a trap, I slammed my shoulder against the door. Once, twice, on the third try, the old wood splintered and gave way. I stumbled into the room, my flashlight sweeping the space, ready for anything. But what I found, or rather, didn't find, left me cold with dread. The beam of my flashlight revealed a room as empty and desolate as the rest of the house. No terrified woman, no sign of struggle. Just dust, cobwebs, and a tape recorder sitting on the floor in the center of the room. My blood ran cold as I approached it. The small red light blinked steadily, indicating it was still recording. With a trembling hand, I pressed the stop button, then rewind. The soft whir of the tape filled the silence. I hit play. A woman's voice, terrified and pleading, filled the room. It was the same voice from the phone calls. Please, help me. He's going to kill me. The recording ended with a click. Realization washed over me like ice water. I'd been manipulated, lured here by a carefully crafted ruse. But why? And who was behind it? The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Suddenly, the empty house felt much more sinister. Was I alone, or was someone watching, waiting? I keyed my radio. Dispatch, this is Unit 17. The calls were a setup. I need backup at 1423 Elm Street immediately. Static crackled in response. Of course, the old house's thick walls were probably interfering with the signal. I had to get out, to regroup and approach this situation with reinforcements. But as I turned to leave, a floorboard creaked somewhere in the house. It could have been the old structure settling, but my instincts screamed otherwise. Someone else was here. I drew my weapon, adrenaline surging. I couldn't leave. Not now. Whoever had set this trap might still be in the house. And if there was even a chance that the woman from the recording was real and in danger, I had to find her. Taking a deep breath, I stepped back into the hallway. It was time to search the rest of the house. With my gun drawn, I methodically swept through the upper floor once more, then made my way back downstairs. Every shadow seemed to hide a potential threat, every creak of the old house a possible footstep. But room after room yielded nothing but dust and decay. I was about to admit defeat when I noticed something odd in the kitchen. A faint draft, barely perceptible, coming from what appeared to be a solid wall. Running my hand along the peeling wallpaper, I felt it, a slight seam, invisible to the eye. Heart pounding, I pressed against the wall. With a groan, a hidden door swung inward, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. The basement. Of course. How could I have forgotten to check for a basement? The stairs creaked ominously under my weight as I made my way down, flashlight in one hand, gun in the other. The air grew colder, damper, with each step. At the bottom, I swept my light across the space, revealing a scene that made my blood run cold. The basement was a stark contrast to the abandoned upper floors. It was clean, organized, and clearly in use. Work tables lined the walls, covered in tools and electronic equipment. But what caught my eye was a bulletin board covered in newspaper clippings, photos, and handwritten notes. As I approached, my stomach churned. The clippings were all about the same case, an unsolved kidnapping from 20 years ago. A young woman, never found. And there, in the center of the board, was a recent photo of a woman who could have been her twin. Suddenly, a muffled sound came from behind a closed door at the far end of the basement. My grip tightened on my gun. Whatever sick game this was, it ended now. I had to find that woman and get us both out of here. As I stared at the bulletin board, a wave of recognition hit me. The unsolved case from 20 years ago. I knew it. It was one of my first assignments as a rookie cop, a case that had haunted me for years. Sarah Thompson, 22, vanished without a trace. We searched for months, following every lead, but came up empty. The case went cold, but it never left me. And now, here it was, splayed out before me in this sinister basement. The recent photo at the center of the board showed a woman who could have been Sarah's twin, or perhaps her daughter. The resemblance was uncanny. Beside it was a note. The cycle repeats. My mind raced. Was this a copycat crime? Or had the original kidnapper resurfaced after all these years? The meticulous nature of the setup, the detailed research on the old case. This was the work of someone obsessed, someone who had been planning this for a long time. Another muffled sound came from behind the closed door, snapping me back to the present. Whatever the connection to the past, there was a woman in danger now. I approached the door cautiously, memories of the old case flooding back. The endless searches, the sleepless nights, the feeling of utter helplessness. I couldn't let that happen again. Not this time. With grim determination, I reached for the door handle. The past and present were colliding in this moment, and I was the only one who could stop history from repeating itself. As I turned the handle, I silently vowed to do whatever it took to save this woman and finally bring closure to a case that had defined my career. This time, I wouldn't fail. The door creaked open, and I stepped into the unknown, ready to face whatever or whoever waited on the other side. The door opened to reveal a small, dimly lit room. My flashlight beam cut through the gloom, illuminating a scene that made my heart race. There, bound to a chair in the center of the room, was a woman, gagged, terrified, but alive. Her eyes widened as they met mine, a mixture of fear and desperate hope. But before I could move towards her, a voice behind me froze me in my tracks. "I've been waiting for you, Officer Holloway." I spun around, my gun raised. In the doorway stood a man, his face hidden in shadow. He held a gun, pointed steadily at me. "Drop your weapon," I commanded, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. He chuckled, a chilling sound. "After all these years, you're still giving orders. But not this time, Jack. This time, you're going to listen." As he stepped into the light, recognition hit me like a punch to the gut. David Thompson, Sarah's brother. He'd been just a teenager when she disappeared, destroyed by grief and anger. "David," I said, trying to keep my voice calm, "you don't have to do this. We can still make this right." His eyes, filled with a manic gleam, locked onto mine. "Make it right? You had your chance 20 years ago. You failed Sarah. You failed all of us." I saw his finger tighten on the trigger. In that split second, I made my decision. I dove to the side, squeezing off a shot as I went down. The sound was deafening in the small room. David cried out, his gun clattering to the floor. I'd hit his arm, but he was still standing, his face contorted with rage. As I scrambled to my feet, he charged at me with a roar of fury. The final confrontation had begun. David's charge caught me off guard, his shoulder ramming into my midsection. We crashed into the wall, my gun skittering across the floor. Pain exploded in my back, but adrenaline kept me moving. We grappled fiercely, each fighting for dominance. David was younger, fueled by years of pent-up rage, but I had experience on my side. I managed to break his hold and landed a solid punch to his jaw. He staggered back, giving me a moment to catch my breath. "David, stop this," I pleaded. "This won't bring Sarah back." His face twisted in anguish. "No, but it'll make you feel what I felt. The helplessness, the pain of losing someone." He lunged again, but this time I was ready. I sidestepped, using his momentum to slam him into the wall. The impact dazed him long enough for me to pin his arms behind his back. "It's over, David," I said, my voice heavy with exhaustion and sadness. As I cuffed him, I could hear him sobbing, all the fight draining out of him. 20 years of grief and anger released in a flood. With David secured, I rushed to the bound woman. Her eyes were wide with fear and relief as I gently removed her gag and started working on her restraints. "You're safe now," I assured her, my hands shaking slightly as I untied the ropes. "What's your name?" "Emily," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "Emily Thompson. I'm Sarah's daughter." The revelation hit me like a ton of bricks. Sarah had been pregnant when she disappeared. This was the missing piece of the puzzle we never knew. As I helped Emily to her feet, I could hear sirens in the distance. Backup was finally arriving. We stumbled towards the stairs, leaving the basement and its dark secrets behind. The nightmare was over, but I knew the real work was just beginning. The days following the rescue were a blur of debriefings, medical checkups, and sleepless nights. Emily Thompson was safe, physically unharmed but bearing the invisible scars of her ordeal. As for me, a few bruises and a cracked rib were small prices to pay for the outcome. The story unfolded like a twisted novel. Sarah, it turned out, had run away when she found out she was pregnant, fearing her family's reaction. She died in childbirth, and Emily had been raised in foster care, unaware of her origins. David, consumed by guilt and obsession, had spent years tracking her down, convinced that recreating the scenario of Sarah's disappearance would somehow bring closure. The town of Maplewood was in shock. The quiet community had been harboring this dark secret for 2 decades, and now it was exposed for all to see. Neighbors who had known David as a troubled teenager struggled to reconcile that image with the man who had orchestrated such an elaborate and terrifying plot. As for me, I found myself grappling with a mix of emotions. Relief at Emily's rescue, certainly, but also a gnawing sense of what if. If we had dug deeper 20 years ago, could we have uncovered the truth about Sarah? Could we have spared Emily and David from the paths their lives had taken? In the midst of it all, I found an unexpected ally in Emily. Despite her trauma, she showed remarkable resilience. We talked for hours, filling in the gaps of her family history, helping each other make sense of the tangled web of past and present. As the media frenzy began to die down, I knew that the impact of these events would linger long after the headlines faded. For Maplewood, for Emily, for David, and for me, nothing would ever be quite the same again. Returning to duty after the events at the Victorian house wasn't easy. Every call, every dispatch, carried a new weight. I found myself hyper-vigilant, seeing potential threats in every shadow. But I also felt a renewed sense of purpose, a commitment to protect my community that burned brighter than ever before. The investigation into David's actions continued, revealing a complex network of obsession and planning. We discovered he had been monitoring police frequencies for years, waiting for the right moment to set his plan in motion. The case became a wake-up call for our department, exposing vulnerabilities we'd never considered. Emily, showing remarkable strength, decided to stay in Maplewood. She wanted to connect with the community her mother had known, to reclaim the family history that had been denied to her. I found myself becoming a sort of unofficial guardian, helping her navigate the complexities of her newfound identity. As for David, he was facing a long sentence. But I couldn't bring myself to see him solely as a criminal. He was also a victim of circumstance, of grief, of a system that had failed to recognize his pain. I made a point to visit him, trying to understand, to find some way to help him find peace. The old Victorian house stood empty once more, a silent reminder of the secrets it had held. There was talk of tearing it down, but part of me hoped it would stand, a testament to the fact that even in the quietest towns, darkness can lurk behind closed doors. As I patrolled the streets of Maplewood, I carried with me the lessons of that fateful night. The world wasn't black and white, victims and perpetrators weren't always clearly defined, and the past had a way of reaching into the present. But most importantly, I learned that vigilance, compassion, and the unwavering pursuit of truth were the best weapons against the darkness. And as long as I wore this badge, I would wield them with everything I had. My name is Jack Harper, and I've been a first responder in rural Vermont for over a decade. The quiet nights and peaceful landscapes can be deceiving. Danger often lurks in the most unexpected places. This is the story of one such night that changed everything. It was a typical Tuesday evening shift. I was settled in at the station, sipping my third cup of coffee and half listening to the idle chatter of my colleagues. The clock on the wall ticked steadily towards midnight, and I found myself hoping for an uneventful night. Then the call came in. The shrill ring of the emergency line cut through the calm like a knife. I reached for the phone, my trained instincts kicking in as I answered. "Emergency services, what's your situation?" The voice on the other end was breathless, terrified. A woman, her words tumbling out in a frantic jumble. "Please, help me. He's going to kill me. I'm at the old Mackenzie farm on Willow Creek Road. Please hurry." The line went dead. My heart raced as I grabbed my gear. The Mackenzie farm was way out in the sticks, at least a 30-minute drive on a good day. But this was no good day, and every second counted. "I'm taking this one," I called out to my supervisor, already halfway out the door. "Jack, wait for backup," he shouted after me, but I was already gone. As I sped down the dark country roads, my mind raced with possibilities. The old Mackenzie place had been abandoned for years, a crumbling reminder of better times. What was this woman doing out there? And who was trying to kill her? The full moon cast an eerie glow over the landscape as I pushed my vehicle to its limits. I knew I was breaking protocol by going in alone, but something in that woman's voice told me there was no time to waste. Little did I know, I was driving straight into a nightmare that would haunt me for years to come. The journey to the Mackenzie farm seemed to stretch on forever. As I navigated the winding roads, The dense Vermont woods closed in around me, their shadows dancing in my headlights. The radio crackled with updates from dispatch, but out here, I was on my own. Finally, I turned onto Willow Creek Road. The pavement gave way to gravel, then to dirt. The old farm loomed ahead, a dark silhouette against the starry sky. I killed the engine and lights, not wanting to announce my arrival to any potential threats. As I stepped out of the vehicle, the silence hit me like a physical force. No crickets chirped, no owls hooted. It was as if nature itself was holding its breath. The air was thick with tension and the sweet scent of decaying leaves. I approached the farmhouse cautiously, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The moonlight cast long shadows across the overgrown yard, transforming innocent farm equipment into menacing shapes. Every step I took seemed to echo in the eerie stillness. As I neared the porch, my stomach dropped. The front door hung askew on its hinges, splintered with evidence of a violent entry. Shards of glass from a broken window glittered on the worn planks like fallen stars. Something terrible had happened here. I hesitated at the threshold, my training warring with my instincts. Protocol dictated that I should wait for backup, secure the perimeter. But the desperation in that woman's voice echoed in my mind. She didn't have time for protocol. Taking a deep breath, I steeled myself and stepped into the darkness of the farmhouse. The floorboards creaked under my weight, and the musty smell of abandonment filled my nostrils. As my eyes adjusted to the gloom, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Whatever horrors awaited me inside, there was no turning back now. The silence inside the farmhouse was oppressive, broken only by the soft creak of floorboards beneath my feet. My flashlight beams swept across the room, revealing peeling wallpaper and abandoned furniture draped in ghostly sheets. Dust motes danced in the light, stirred by my movement through this forgotten place. I moved cautiously from room to room, my senses on high alert. The living room was a snapshot of a life long abandoned. Faded family photos still hung crooked on the walls, their smiling faces a stark contrast to the decay surrounding them. In the kitchen, shattered dishes littered the floor, evidence of a violent struggle. As I ascended the creaking stairs to the second floor, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Each step felt like an eternity, the wood groaning under my weight as if protesting my intrusion. The upstairs hallway stretched before me, a gauntlet of closed doors and untold secrets. I checked each room methodically, my heart pounding in my chest. A child's bedroom, frozen in time, stuffed animals staring with lifeless button eyes. A bathroom, its mirror cracked, reflecting fractured images of my tense face. A master bedroom, its bed unmade, as if its occupants had just risen. But no sign of the woman who had called for help. As I turned to head back downstairs, a faint sound caught my attention. Was it a whimper? A muffled cry? I held my breath, straining to hear. There it was again, coming from outside. The barn. Of course. How could I have forgotten about the barn? I moved swiftly back down the stairs and towards the rear of the house. As I reached for the back door handle, a sudden crash from behind made me spin around, heart racing. But it was just a picture frame, fallen from the wall. Taking a deep breath, I stepped out into the moonlit yard. The barn loomed before me, a dark monolith holding untold horrors. Whatever awaited me inside, I knew I had to face it. The night air felt electric as I approached the barn. Its weathered doors stood slightly ajar, a sliver of darkness inviting me in. The sound I'd heard earlier came again, a muffled sob that sent chills down my spine. I drew my flashlight and service weapon, steeling myself for what lay ahead. With a deep breath, I pushed the door open. It creaked ominously, the sound echoing in the cavernous space. My flashlight beam cut through the gloom, revealing rusted farm equipment and moldering hay bales. The air was thick with the musty scent of decay and something else, fear. "Hello," I called out softly. This is emergency services. I'm here to help. A whimper came from the far corner, behind a stack of old crates. I moved cautiously, every step measured, aware that danger could be lurking in the shadows. As I rounded the crates, my light fell upon a figure huddled on the ground. It was a woman, her wrists and ankles bound with rope, a gag pulled tight across her mouth. Her eyes, wide with terror, locked onto mine. I quickly holstered my weapon and knelt beside her, working to remove the gag. "It's okay," I soothed. "You're safe now. I'm here to help you." As the gag came free, she gasped, "He's here. My husband. He's gone mad. Please, you have to get me out of here before he comes back." I worked on untying her bonds, my mind racing. "Your husband did this? Where is he now?" "I don't know," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "He's been in and out all night. He's not himself. He's dangerous." Just as I freed her hands, a sound from outside froze us both. Heavy footsteps, approaching the barn. The woman's eyes widened in panic. "He's back," she breathed. The woman's words hung in the air, heavy with dread. "My husband," she whispered urgently. "He's a fugitive. Escaped from prison last week. I thought I could help him, but he's changed. He's not the man I married anymore." My mind raced, piecing together the gravity of the situation. This wasn't just a domestic dispute. We were dealing with a dangerous criminal, someone with nothing left to lose. "Listen carefully," I said, keeping my voice low and steady. "I need you to hide. There's a hayloft up there. Can you climb?" She nodded, fear etched across her face. I helped her to her feet, and she scrambled up the ladder with surprising agility. Just as she disappeared from view, the barn door creaked open. I positioned myself behind a tractor, weapon drawn, heart pounding. The fugitive's silhouette filled the doorway, backlit by the moon. He was a large man, his movements betraying a coiled tension. "Sarah," he called out, his voice gravelly and menacing. "Where are you, you stupid bitch?" I weighed my options. I was outnumbered, outgunned, and in unfamiliar territory. The smart move would be to wait for backup, but one glance at the hayloft, where the woman, Sarah, huddled in terror, and I knew I couldn't wait. Taking a deep breath, I stepped out from my hiding spot. "Sir, this is emergency services. Put your hands where I can see them." The man whirled around, surprise quickly morphing into rage. "Who the fuck are you?" he snarled, reaching behind his back. Time seemed to slow. I saw the glint of metal as he pulled out a gun. In that moment, I realized this confrontation was inevitable. There was no talking this man down, no peaceful resolution. It was him or us. As he raised his weapon, I made my decision. The final showdown was upon us, and I was all that stood between this fugitive and the innocent woman he'd terrorized. "Drop the weapon," I shouted, my voice echoing through the barn. The fugitive's eyes, wild and desperate, locked onto mine. For a heartbeat, neither of us moved. Then, chaos erupted. He fired, the muzzle flash illuminating the barn in a brief, hellish glow. I dove behind a rusted tractor, feeling the bullet whiz past my ear. The acrid smell of gunpowder filled the air as I returned fire, my shots punching holes in the wooden walls. "You can't win this," I called out, trying to reason with him. "More officers are on their way. Give yourself up." His answer was another barrage of bullets. I heard Sarah whimper from the hayloft, and I knew I had to end this quickly. I took a chance, rolling to a new position behind some old oil drums. The movement caught his attention, and he emptied his clip in my direction. As he fumbled to reload, I saw my opening. I rushed him, tackling him to the ground. We grappled in the dirt, each fighting for control. He was strong, fueled by desperation and rage, but I had training on my side. I managed to pin his gun arm, slamming his wrist against the floor until the weapon clattered away. "It's over," I grunted, struggling to subdue him. "Stop fighting." For a moment, it seemed like he might give up. Then, with a roar of fury, he head-butted me. Stars exploded in my vision, and I felt my grip loosening. He reached for his fallen gun, fingers just brushing the handle. In that crucial moment, a shout came from above. "John, stop!" Sarah stood at the edge of the hayloft, her face a mix of fear and determination. The fugitive froze, distracted by his wife's appearance. It was all the opening I needed. I grabbed my handcuffs and, with a final burst of effort, managed to restrain him. As I recited his rights, the fight seemed to drain out of him. He slumped to the ground, defeated. The confrontation was over, but the night's ordeal was far from finished. As the echo of the struggle faded, an eerie calm settled over the barn. I helped Sarah down from the hayloft, her legs shaking as she descended the ladder. She looked at her husband, now securely handcuffed and sitting against the wall, with a mixture of relief and sorrow. "Are you okay?" I asked her, noting the bruises on her arms and the haunted look in her eyes. She nodded slowly, tears welling up. I never thought it would come to this. When he escaped, I thought I could help him. I thought our love was enough." Her voice broke. I was so wrong. I placed a comforting hand on her shoulder, feeling the weight of her shattered dreams. In the distance, I could hear the wail of approaching sirens. Backup was finally arriving. As we waited, I couldn't help but reflect on the night's events. The farmhouse, once a place of terror, now seemed sad and empty. The moonlight streaming through the barn's broken boards no longer felt menacing, just melancholy. When my colleagues arrived, they took charge of the scene efficiently. The fugitive was led away, and paramedics tended to Sarah's injuries. I gave my statement, recounting the harrowing details of the confrontation. As dawn broke, painting the sky in soft pinks and golds, I found myself standing alone in the farmyard. The peaceful countryside stood in stark contrast to the violence that had unfolded here. I felt changed, as if the events of the night had etched themselves into my very being. Sarah approached me one last time before being taken to the hospital. "Thank you," she said simply, her eyes conveying what words couldn't. I nodded, watching as she was led away. The farmhouse stood silent behind me, its secrets now laid bare, a reminder of the thin line between safety and danger, love and fear. In the days that followed, I returned to my routine at the station. But something had shifted within me. The Mackenzie farm case had left an indelible mark on my psyche, a stark reminder of the hidden dangers lurking in the most unexpected places. As I drove through the peaceful Vermont countryside on my patrols, I found myself more alert, more aware of the secrets that might be concealed behind picturesque facades. The thin veneer of tranquility that I had once taken for granted now seemed fragile, easily shattered by human desperation and violence. I thought often of Sarah and the choices that had led her to that terrifying night. How easily love could blind us, how quickly safety could turn to danger. Her story became a cautionary tale I carried with me, a reminder to look beyond the surface, to remain vigilant even in the face of apparent calm. The psychological impact of that night lingered, manifesting in moments of heightened awareness and occasional nightmares. But it also reinforced my commitment to my job, to be there when the facade of peace crumbled and reveal the threats hidden in plain sight. In the end, I realized that true safety comes not from ignorance of danger, but from the courage to face it head-on. We've reached the end. If you liked it and can help the channel that is just starting, please subscribe. This will help a lot. Thank you all.